All right, welcome back. We are going to do chapter 3 today. Addie's very excited. Chapter 3, Church Bells Tolling. Saturday, August 25th. The spread of the disease and the fear among the citizens had one immediate consequence. People began leaving the city. Clothes were packed in haste, windows slammed and shuttered, the doors locked tight. Sometimes servants were ordered to stay behind to guard the house against thieves. Sometimes everyone living under a roof fled. Printer and publisher Matthew Carey watched sadly as almost every hour of the day carts, wagons, coaches, and chairs were to be seen transporting family and furniture to the country in every direction. Hundreds exit Philadelphia on the rain-swept Sunday. More left in the days that followed, as Dr. Rush advised to fly from it. Was repeated over and over again. Shop owners, carpenters, councilmen and printers, lawyers, ministers, nurses, and bankers. People from every rank and station wanted to escape the spreading pestilence and breathe fresh air in the countryside. 23 watchmen were supposed to patrol the city streets every night, but their numbers had dwindled to a mere handful by the end of the week. Suddenly, the fever seemed to be everywhere. Elizabeth Drinker felt surrounded by disease when she made a diary entry for Wednesday, August 28th. There is a man next door, but one to us, who Dr. Kuhn says will quickly die from this terrible disorder. Kitty Prussia, over against us, is very ill, and a man at Ye Shoemaker's next door to neighbor Wallens, homesick within our alley. Mayor Clarkson, ordered to clean the streets, has been carried out, but not very rapidly. Like others around them, many scavengers abandoned their brooms and shovels and ran away from the city. People whispered rumors of more and more deaths. They saw friends and relatives stricken. They'd heard the church bells tolling, 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 and they ran. Drinker's diary entry from August 28th concludes, Isaac Wharton and the family moved out of town. P. Harshorn's family and neighbor Wallens also out. The inhabitants are leaving the city in great numbers. Judge William Lewis saw house after house in the neighborhood abandoned. Saw the streets empty. Saw the hearses constantly passing his home and fled. He then wrote a letter to his good friend Dr. Rush, in which he confessed, I never left Philadelphia with so much pleasure as yesterday, nor found such pressure in the country as I do today. Historians now estimate that as many as 20,000 people abandoned the city during the fever. This meant that thousands were left behind. Most of these stayed because they were too poor and had no place to go. They did not own country homes or have relatives or friends outside of the city who would be willing to put them up until the fever ended. A very few, chose to stay behind because they felt a sense of duty in their city and its trapped inhabitants. One of those who stayed and would stay throughout the fever was Matthew Clarkson. He had grown up in a prominent New York family who contributed large sums of money in the Revolutionary War, helped found the Bank of Pennsylvania, and gone on to amass a fortune as a trustee in the municipal company, selling insurance to Philadelphia's citizens. He entered politics as an alderman in 1790, and then because of his record of achievements and amiable personality, the rest of the aldermen chose him to be mayor in 1792. Clarkson stayed despite many good reasons to flee. He was 60 years old, with a wife and 9 children to look after. In addition, his title as mayor was largely an honorary one. At the time, the mayor of Philadelphia had no real power. All authority to pass law and raise money was held by a variety of committees made up of the members of the town council. Even in an emergency, the council was supposed to appoint a committee to determine the course of action. And to these, one more compelling reason for Clarkson to abandon his post, yellow fever had already seized his wife and killed his youngest son, Gerald. Mayor Clarkson could have cited his powerlessness, could have pled concern for his family, and fled the danger, as many other aldermen were doing. Yet he understood that as mayor, he was a symbolic head of a town. If he scampered like the rest, it would be like a father abandoning his family. He chose to stay and act, even though he knew it would mean breaking the law. One of the first things he did was to ask the country's most prestigious medical society, the College of Physicians, to assemble on a rainy Sunday, August 25th. The college was dedicated to improving the science of medicine, and its member physicians were among the best educated and most experienced doctors in the United States. A few had been around in 1762, when the last yellow fever epidemic had struck. If any medical group was qualified to provide guidance concerning yellow fever, it was the College of Physicians. What took place that day did not bode well with Clarkson or for Philadelphia. Of the 26 physicians who made up the college, only 16 appeared. Some of those absent had good excuses, such as having to attend to an increasing number of patients ill with the fever, but many physicians had simply chosen not to show up or had already moved to the countryside. What is more, their meeting produced very little that would calm their fellow citizens. There was a terrible fever running throughout the city. The learned doctors all readily agreed. But after comparing descriptions of symptoms, they began to disagree on the nature and cause of the illness, as well as what to do about it. Essentially, the doctors formed two camps, one headed by Benjamin Rush, believing that they were facing yellow fever and that it had a local cause, the stagnant, foul-smelling air that had infested Philadelphia all summer. Some factors affecting the quality of air, such as the hot, humid, oppressive summer weather, were out of control. But other things could be done to purify it, such as getting rid of the bad coffee and cleaning up the streets and alleyways. Opposing Dr. Rush was Dr. William Curry. Curry was not as well known as Rush in Philadelphia, but he was the only member of a college who had actually done research on yellow fever, enough to have written 2 books about the disease. And he wasn't afraid to disagree with his more famous colleague. Curry agreed that there was a terrible fever infecting the city, but he simply did not think it was yellow fever. In addition, he felt strongly that whatever fever they might be facing had been imported from another area, probably the West Indies, by the recently arrived Santo Domingans, and that it was spread by close contact with the infected person. Curry admitted that the illness was strengthened by a particular construction of the atmosphere, but he insisted that the best way to deal with this was by quarantining the sick. Most of the doctors at the first meeting felt they did not know enough about the illness to give a specific name. While they did not immediately side with Curry, their cautious approach miffed Rush, who felt that they should have deferred to his medical opinion. He had, after all, actually dealt with yellow fever firsthand, while Curry had merely studied the disease. Still, Sunday's discussion and disagreements were a free communication of sentiment, as Dr. Samuel Griffiths remembered. During the weeks to follow, the divide between the members of the college would grow wider and the arguments more heated and personal. The doctors met again on Monday. Although this time only 11 of them were in attendance. At this meeting, they issued a list of measures for citizens to follow. The list was sent to Mayor Clarkson, who sent it over to Governor Mifflin and the newspapers. Many of the recommendations were intelligent and reasonable. Clean up the streets, set a hospital for fever victims, avoid fatigue, limit the intake of beer or wine, put patients in airy rooms, remove fouled clothing and bed linens frequently. Other suggestions offered a false sense of security. The doctors recommended that a strong-smelling substance, such as vinegar, be sprinkled on handkerchiefs and held up to the nose to ward off the fever, that the gunpowder be burned to purify the air. One suggestion alarmed many citizens: stay away from anyone with the fever. Heightening the panic was what the list did not offer: a cure for the disease. When the list was published on Tuesday, the blazing sun had reappeared and fetid. The warm air once again choked the city. And people were still pouring out of Philadelphia and Doves. Even those who were initially hesitant about leaving, read the list and joined the exodus. Philadelphia that day had completely changed pace from a week before. Few people walked on the streets who were not fleeing. Those who felt they had to go out and check on an aged parent or to buy medicine or food did so wearing vinegar-soaked clothing and clutching bags of camphor, a bitter-smelling substance we now used an insect repellent, to their noses. Matthew Carey went around town noting carefully what was happening and would later turn these observations into a written history of the epidemic. The smoke of tobacco, he pointed out, being regarded as a preventative. Many persons, even women and small boys, had cigars almost certainly in their mouths. Others, placing full confidence in garlic, chewed it almost all day long. Some kept them in their pockets and shoes. Everyone walked into the middle of the street so they couldn't get close to the infected homes. People stayed clear of funerals, doctors, and ministers. Acquaintances and friends avoided each other in the streets, Carey observed, only signified their regard by a cold nod. Stores and workshops began to close. Even schools, every school in town suddenly shut its doors, either because the teachers demanded it or because no students had showed up for class. Fires were lit in street corners to dry up the unhealthy, humid air and to drive away the bad smells. The sound of gunfire erupted day and night as frightened citizens attempted to cleanse the air with gunpowder smoke. The streets, Carey reported, wore the appearance of gloom and melancholy. There were, of course, a few hardy individuals out and about. A contributor to the Dunlap's American Daily Advisor, who went by the initials AB, could be seen poking around rainwater barrels in his neighborhood. Whoever will take the trouble to examine them, he noted, will find millions of mosquitoes fishing about the water with great agility, in a state not quite prepared to emerge and fly off. AB then advised readers that a gill, about 4 ounces, of a common oil poured into the water would kill off these troublesome creatures within 24 hours. Most people weren't interested in doing household experiments and instead played it safe by hiding indoors. They kept busy, however. Day after day was spent scrubbing floors, walls, and ceilings. Rooms were whitewashed and then sprinkled with vinegar. Logs burned day and night in fireplaces despite the oppressive heat, and gunpowder and other noxious chemicals were tossed in frequently. Charles Wills Peale, noted painter, inventor, and collector of natural history objects, shut himself, his wife Betsy, and 6 of his children inside a large museum residence. He spent a great deal of time classifying his mineral collection, though he made certain the house is fumed with vinegar, and he performed about 6 firing of a musket within the house every day. The live birds he had collected as specimens were cooked and eaten, eliminating the need to go out to the market. All went well until Betsy ventured out into the garden and, according to Peale, smelled something disagreeable. The next day she fell ill and was confined to bed. Their family doctor had already died of the fever, and his replacement soon caught it also. After this, Peale took over the doctoring and chores himself, even though he too eventually contracted a mild case of yellow fever. Both would survive, though they never got over the fear that these near escapes caused, and kept their doors securely bolted against all visitors throughout the plague. Dr. Benjamin Duffield, a member of the College of Physicians, had his own recommendations for dealing with the fever, which he gladly published in the newspapers for all to read. Fresh dirt should be strewn around every room and a depth of 2 inches, he wrote. And the dirt should be changed every day. For additional protection, he suggested taking frequent warm baths and inhaling finely ground black pepper. Ordinary citizens also offered advice and preventatives throughout the town's newspapers. One writer, who signed his name A Hint, said The cause of the fever was in the stinking barrels and rotting garbage routinely found in the backyards and basement. He suggested that instead of storing garbage in these containers, the bones of some with some fresh flesh on them, the entrails of poultry, and many other corruptive matters should be tossed into the streets where the dogs would devour the meat and the cows the vegetables. W.F. warned everyone to prepare carefully for venturing out of doors and suggested that vinegar of the four thieves be used liberally. For the uneducated, W.F. provided a detailed recipe. Take the rue, wormwood, and lavender. Of each one handful, put these together with a gallon of the best vinegar in some stone pan, and let them stand within the warmth of a fire and infuse for 8 days. This brew was to be combined in quart bottles with 3/4 of an ounce of camphor. Next, the reader, assuming that he or she has not contracted the disease during the long cooking process, should rub the temples and loins with this preparation, wash the mouths, and snuff up some into the nostrils. W.F. was confident that anyone who followed this particular procedure would wander about town completely safe. Midwives, nurses, dentists, barbers, apothecaries, wandering healers, quack physicians, and next-door neighbors offered opinions on the disease too. Ads appeared in the newspaper, hawking Peruvian bark, salt of vinegar, refined camphors, and other concoctions, such as Daffy's elixir, which contained so much pure alcohol that a glass of it would put a person into a drunken stupor. The science of the medicines, all in the end of the 18th century, still relied on a great deal of ancient myths and folk remedies. Because of this, people didn't automatically reject the opinion of someone simply because that person wasn't a trained doctor. Despite all of the helpful suggestions offered, people continued to die. 22 on Wednesday, 24 on Thursday, 20 on Friday. Benjamin Rush took time out of a busy day to write his wife. He told her about his dead and dying patients, about the neighbors who had abandoned their homes and businesses. The neighborhood would be desolate in a day or two, he concluded solemnly. Philadelphia was a city in panic and flight. It did not even help when Mayor Clarkson acted on another recommendation from the College of Physicians. The tolling bells that had so thoroughly terrified everyone were ordered to remain still. The great silence that followed did little to comfort those left behind. It was too much like an eternal silence of the grave. See you later.